There is an international situation that is a real crisis that very few people know about. There are 8 million children living in institutions across the world, and 80% of them have a family, have parents they could live with. This is a huge number. 80% of 8 million children do not have to live in an institution. The situation is very diverse across the world. There are emergency situations, there are long-term residential care in all the countries. And we need to focus on changing that situation. And we need to change the situation because all the research, all the data show that it's dangerous and harmful to children to live in institutions for a long time. It's detrimental to their personal development. It's detrimental to their emotional development. It prevents, the Bucharest research shows that it prevents the healthy development of the kid's brain. It even blocks the development of part of the brain, which means that the child that lives long-term in an institution will have long-term and everlasting consequences for living in an institution, and that is not acceptable. There's another issue, is the emotional situation of children in an institution where they are unable to create healthy links and healthy relationships, and this also will prevent them to have a full life as adults and build a solid family. And really, all this will impact the entire society where these children are living. We're very well aware that there are emergency situations, earthquakes, tsunamis, disease that create suddenly a dramatic situation for families and children, where children and families are separated, some adults and some children are dying. And then the response has to be to make sure that these children are safe. This is the emergency response, and we saw this influx in Haiti, we saw this influx in Nepal, and it's very important to make sure that these children are safe. But this has to be only for an emergency situation and for a short-term period. The long term is to rebuild the family structure so the kids can stay within a family, either their own family, and the work is to try to find the living parents. If the parents are not alive, there will be grandparents, uncle, aunts, brothers, sisters, to be able to care for these children. And if that's not possible, there will be other families to be able to care for these children. So it is very important to look at the alternatives to a long-term placement, even in emergency situations. Often people come to us and say, these families are poor, unable to care for their own children. This is why we need to put them in orphanages. This is absurd. Indeed, there is a lot of poverty. Indeed, children need support. But the solution is not to take the kid away from the family. The solution is to support the family to be better able to care for their own children. This is better for the child. This is better for the community. It is also 8 times cheaper to do it that way. It is therefore the reason why we're saying support the families, don't support the orphanages. The Don't Create More Orphans campaign urges donors to rethink their practices and how their money is used. We're not saying close the orphanages. We're saying change their practices. Children in communities are still vulnerable. Children need support. But the solution is not to take the kids away from their families. The solution is to support the children in their families, to rebuild the capacity of the family to care for their children. Money of donors should be to help this old model of orphanage to evolve into a community-based care service. Support these institutions to change the way they work, to work with the families, to rebuild the family's capacity to care for children, to support the family to make better income, to support the children to go into public school, to rebuild the communities. And we're working with these orphanages, and we want to support these orphanages to move their models. And we're already working with quite a few excellent organizations that have moved away from keeping children away from their families to opening their doors and working with the families directly, bringing the children back in the families and supporting the families, and still providing those very important, very good services in education support, in health support, in supporting the entire family, in the entire community, and bringing a real development at local level and at national level. Many people came to us wondering if the money stopped going to these orphanages, what would happen to these children? Will they end up on the streets? Would no one care for them? This is not what we're talking about. We're urging to change the model so that the transition to the family happens. But it doesn't mean that it has to happen now, suddenly, and all the children are out. It has to happen professionally, progressively. Some places it will happen faster because the structures and the system and the country is ready. Other places will go slower. But it is essential that the donor money is aimed at building the capacity of families to care for their children. We're urging every donor, every type of donor, to think about the impact of the donation. You might be an institution giving big amounts. You might be an individual giving small amounts. You might even sponsor a child. You might even go and give your time and energy as a volunteer in these organizations. Whatever you do, you are supporting the system. You are supporting an institution that keeps children away from a family-based care. We urge you to rethink what you're doing. We urge you to rethink how you're giving so that you are rebuilding a family-based care for all these children, that you are part of giving the children the future that they need, the future that they deserve.